Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming to this edition of the Hydrogen Pods. Today I'll be talking about AIDR-H2, an innovative blue hydrogen technology that 8 Rivers has developed. And what we look to do is take CO2 from a problem to a solution. And in this particular instance, the solution is to use CO2 to reform natural gas into clean hydrogen while capturing 100% of the emissions. So obviously a chart we're all familiar with. Emissions across the world come from different sectors. Emissions globally have somewhat stabilized from what we've seen from the IEA, which is very positive. To address some of the emissions in this sector, there are particular sectors that are well suited for hydrogen or alternative fuels, which will be synthesized from hydrogen. In particular, transport, electricity, and what we're initially focused on, which is heavy industry, chemicals, steel, things of this nature. And the IEA has projected particular sectors which are well suited for this. Our primary focus sits in ammonia and in refining. Why? Because that's where the hydrogen economy is today, and we look to meet it where it's at, not where it's going to be. We believe by doing that, we'll be ready to supply into new markets as they develop. So speaking of developing markets, we've seen a lot of hydrogen projects announced to hopefully deliver on this projected demand. We're hyper-focused on the demand that exists today. So this is very promising. Over 1,000 projects have been announced globally. Many have achieved FID or operation. There are many small hydrogen projects in Europe that have already come online. But the projections on future hydrogen demand vary widely. So you see the IEA in 2030 projected that 150 million tons would be required. McKinsey by themselves said, nope, 2050 is when 150 million tons is going to be required. And then a combination of McKinsey and PwC said 660 million tons are going to be required by 2050. Our question is, if all that hydrogen gets delivered, what are the CO2 emissions associated? So we started looking at things like SMR with CCS, and what we saw was that if 660 million tons of hydrogen is delivered by 2050, if you use SMR with CCS, then you're going to put 600 million tons of CO2 into the atmosphere. Not necessarily the direction we want to go. So then we looked at ATR, and we saw that around 300 million tons of CO2 would be put into the atmosphere if we delivered 660 million tons of hydrogen. And that's in part why we came up with AIDR-H2. We said, is there a way that you could redesign hydrogen generation from natural gas without using any post-combustion adsorbent? And that's where Rodney Allam comes in, our chief innovator. So he is a Nobel laureate. He designed what is called the Allam-Fetvet cycle, which is a zero emissions power generation technology. The natural gas version, which has been commercialized by Net Power, which is a company that 8 Rivers created and is now public and separate from us. But they're the most valuable carbon capture company by market capitalization today in the world. So we're very proud of that. And we use that core innovation of the Allam-Fetvet cycle. This is for power generation, to really look at how we would redesign reformation of natural gas into hydrogen while capturing 100% of the emissions. And we said, what if we took out this turbine and we just leveraged the heat to drive the reformation process? Enter AIDR-H2. AIDR-H2 is an innovative blue hydrogen production technology that has lower levelized cost, lower carbon intensity, and is more thermally efficient than anything available on the market today. Let me take you through a little bit of how that works. We start with our core innovation across our whole platform, and that is oxy-combustion. What we saw was that when you burn hydrocarbons with pure oxygen, you get two things. You get CO2 and water. You can condense out water, and then you can use CO2 as a working fluid or a heat transfer fluid into whatever system you're building. And then you have pure CO2 coming out of the tailpipe, no need for any adsorbent, compress it, put it in a pipeline, sequester the CO2. So we start with oxy-combustion. That oxy-combustion will produce hot CO2. That hot CO2 will go into what we call the CO2 Convective Reformer. The CO2 Convective Reformer, think about it as a shell and tube heat exchanger. It then receives the feed gas coming in of natural gas and steam. Out of the CO2 reformer comes syngas out of the bottom, and out of the top comes a cooler CO2 because it's transferred its heat to the catalyst, produce some syngas. That syngas then goes to an oxygen secondary reformer, off-the-shelf kit. Syngas then goes to heat recovery. So we do some heat recuperation, get a little bit of energy out of that for the system, either for a steam generator or other purposes. We then go through a water gas shift and then a PSA or a pressure swing absorber to purify the hydrogen. The tail gas from that PSA then goes back into the combustor. So we recover more energy. So that also, in addition to the heat recuperation, drives our thermal efficiency. And then we have a CO2 loop happening at the top. Now obviously for every incremental amount of combustion that we're doing, we have to take out some CO2. So we do take out CO2, that goes into a pipeline and goes to be sequestered. So that's generally the process for ADR-H2 and how we're leveraging CO2 as the heat transfer fluid to drive a reaction for the reformation of natural gas to hydrogen. This is a rendering of the oxy-combustor that we are in the process of getting built by an outside vendor to be delivered to a project, which I'll talk about in a moment. And this is the CO2 Convective Reformer. We call it a convective reformer because we're transferring heat through convection of CO2 to the reactor tubes, which is then reforming natural gas. So we have syngas and steam and natural gas going in the top. This arrow should be flipped. We're getting syngas out, but we have steam and natural gas going in. We have hot CO2 coming in. It does not mix with the steam and natural gas, and then we get cooler exhaust CO2 coming out. The primary advantage for ADR-H2 is when you have an ATR, there's certain CO2 emissions that just cannot be captured. You just cannot capture them, and then you have an amine process, which also we think causes long-term issues as far as disposal of the amine, and you also have other fugitive emissions from the system. So there is a theoretical limit to the amount of CO2 you can capture from ATR with CCS. With ADR-H2, the CO2 never leaves the system, and in fact is an integral part of the total process. And by doing so, we never let CO2 leave unless we want it to leave. And when it does leave, it is 100% pure and ready for pipeline. And we have designed into the total cost of the facility, the cost of compression as well, and any additional purification that might be needed to meet pipeline specification. So we're not talking about ADR-H2 in a context where then more needs to be done with the CO2. We've designed the whole plant with the end use in mind. In particular, where we're focused with hydrogen today is ammonia. We like ammonia as an alternative energy source in co-firing with coal in Japan and Korea, but we also like ammonia because it provides us a hedge. We can decarbonize the agricultural sector as well, and we'll be well positioned to do that. And ammonia has about a 7 to 8% CAGR, so we think there's plenty of opportunity for more ammonia to be built, and so that further de-risks our first commercial deployment of ADR-H2. We believe this provides dispatchable generation, maritime fuel as well. If you look at MAN, Turbo, and the recips that have been announced that are going in ships, it's a nice energy carrier, it's pretty dense, and it doesn't have any carbon associated with it, so we're able to generate a zero carbon fuel for export. We're putting our money where our mouth is. We're developing a project in the Gulf right now to utilize and deploy ADR-H2. This project is called Project Cormorant. It'll produce around 900,000 tons of ammonia per annum. 1.4 million tons of CO2 will be captured and sequestered. We have purchased land in Port Arthur next to Motiva, so we have about a 160-acre plot. We're 5 months into FEED with Fluor. We expect that to complete in October, November this year, and FID there soon after. We're working with groups like Chart as well as Casale. So Casale will produce the CO2 Convective Reformer with the mechanical warranties and guarantees that are required. The catalyst that we're using in that is off-the-shelf reformation catalyst. It's nothing special, so we're not doing new science. Our partners at SK have, they're a shareholder in 8 Rivers, and they're obviously participating in a big way as well. So we're very excited about delivering this project and the first ADR-H2 system. And we have a booth over here in the Hydrogen Hub after this talk. If you want to talk more, our team will be over there. and I'll open up the floor for questions. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate you guys coming.
Can we have a big round of applause for our speaker?